We begin with some breaking news as Israel has resumed fighting in Gaza. The defense minister says his army will press on with the offensive until all Israeli hostages are released. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says the new Israeli airstrikes have killed over 300 people. The operation is Israel's most intense assault on Gaza since a long-negotiated ceasefire with Hamas took effect in January.
In the early hours of Tuesday morning, explosions lit up the night sky across Gaza as Israel hit dozens of targets across the enclave. Strikes were reported in multiple locations, including northern Gaza and Gaza City, as well as Khan Yunis and Rafah in the central and southern Gaza Strip. It was a rude awakening for hundreds of frantic families who were left scrambling to get their wounded to the few remaining hospitals. Palestinian health ministry officials have confirmed hundreds were killed, with hundreds more wounded, many of them children. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the action was because Hamas repeatedly refused to accept a U.S. proposal to extend the current ceasefire and release the nearly 60 remaining hostages. Officials have said the operation is open-ended and expected to expand.
The Israeli Air Force initiated a series of attacks against Hamas targets in Gaza. We will show no mercy on our enemies. Let me be very clear. Israel will not stop until all of our hostages are back home.
The surprise attacks have shattered a period of relative calm during the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and raised the prospect of a full return to fighting.
Today, the occupation committed several massacres in all areas of the Gaza Strip, with more than 200 martyrs arriving to hospitals across the sector, and hundreds wounded with severe injuries, including fractures, burns and head injuries, requiring urgent surgical intervention.
As a region already in tatters faces only more chaos in the days to come, the prospect of any lasting peace to enable reconstruction seems to be vanishing.
Earlier, I spoke to journalist Balig Sladeen in Tel Aviv about the scale of this overnight attack.
Yes, well, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry has said that 356 people were killed. Many of them are saying that they are children and women. And the Israeli side is reporting hitting and targeting Hamas's officials. We're talking about the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Interior. We're talking about the Director of Internal Security, as well as the head of the Emergency Committee in Gaza. At least 5 Hamas officials has been targeted by Israel and killed, according to the reports. So we are seeing that Israel has opened the air campaign for now. No boots on the ground. There is no ground operation for now. But the targeting hit tunnels and many command centers that are now designated as homes inside the Gaza Strip, and an intense campaign on the north of the Strip, apparently in an attempt to move the people from the north back to the south again, and also the closing of the Rafah crossing. By the way, a short while ago, the Israeli, the IDF spokesperson in Arabic actually issued a statement calling on the Gazans to move from areas such as Beit Lahia and others also in the south of the Strip back to the camps, back to the designated humanitarian zone. So we see that Israel is back in fighting. The resumption of war started overnight.
That was Balig Sladeen, and we can now speak to Mairav Zonszein. She's a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Welcome, Mairav. You recently wrote that Israel has no good answer for Hamas. What are they trying to do here, then?
I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to do because they've done the same thing for 15 months and have not achieved either of their war goals of defeating Hamas or getting the hostages back. It's important also to note that the families of the hostages and the hostages who have returned are against this resumption of war precisely because they are worried about the hostages. And again, Israel has 2 war goals: defeating Hamas and getting the hostages back. And it has not achieved either of those through bombardment that we haven't seen the likes of which since World War II. So it's unclear to me what Israel thinks it's going to achieve by doing the same thing over again.
The ceasefire, I think it's safe to say, is no more. It was supposed to move on to a second phase 2 weeks ago. That would have actually seen the release of the remaining living hostages, at least. Why did that not go ahead?
There's Netanyahu wants to stay in power. His far right wants the resumption of the war. So his domestic political concerns are certainly part of that. It's possible that also many in the Israeli political echelon believe that they can continue to bombard Gaza and somehow make the Palestinians disappear. The Trump plan, so-called, of the transfer and ethnic cleansing of Gaza is something that I don't think anyone takes seriously. But the notion that Israel can continue to bombard Gaza and just basically have this illusion of, disappearing away this problem is something that the Israeli political echelon has adopted. But it's important to note that Israel violated the ceasefire that it itself signed in phase 1 when it didn't pull its troops out of the Philadelphia corridor. And it is now, again, violating the ceasefire by bombarding Gaza. And the Israelis understand that. So that's also very important to point out. This is not a Hamas violation.
Yeah. Before we look at how all of this is playing out domestically, I want to take a closer look at the role of the U.S. now that you mentioned Donald Trump there briefly. According to the White House, this was all coordinated with them. They were instrumental in negotiating the ceasefire. Why would they give Israel the go-ahead to resume fighting?
That's an excellent question that I don't have an answer for. Trump has talked about ending wars and being a peacemaker. His special envoy Witkoff and another envoy on hostages, Bowler, have spoken very clearly about their commitment to getting the hostages out. So my kind of only explanation or hope is that the U.S. is greenlighting this for Israel in order to try and put more pressure on Hamas to come back and then release hostages on the terms and conditions that Israel would like to see, which is basically a release of hostages without Israeli concessions on withdrawing from Gaza. So it's possible that Israel will now limit its offensive to airstrikes and then try and see if Hamas will, release hostages. But I don't think that that's going to happen. So it's unclear what the strategy is at this point.
You already said that the hostages' families are extremely troubled by this. But more broadly, how will this return to war play out for the prime minister domestically?
Well, he needs to pass the budget for 2025 at the end of this month, and there has been some, discontent unrelated to Gaza in the parliament. I think that some of the decisions by certain Knesset members, the threats to not vote with the budget, are mostly a bluff, but that's part of his concern. So Netanyahu, is trying to kind of placate and pacify all the various members of his parliament, both on Gaza and on domestic issues relating to the ultra-Orthodox. In order to secure his coalition, he also just threatened to fire his head of General Security Service. And so now these airstrikes are distracting from the fact that Israel is headed towards a full constitutional crisis because it's basically illegal, according to the Attorney General, to fire him right now. So there's a lot of moving parts going on. When Israel is firing and shooting, then people tend to stay quiet. So any kind of protests by the hostage families, any kind of protests by the security establishment itself, former people in the security establishment who are very angry at Netanyahu and believe that he's basically trying to continue with this kind of coup, all of that will be silenced now as a result of the strikes in Gaza.
It was Mairav Zonszein, senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much for sharing your views with us.
Thank you.